So the sunglasses, those are real, by the way. There are many portraits of him with those sunglasses. I know it sounds strange because of the year, but they did have sunglasses back then. And they're just very expensive. So when you see these paintings of Quevedo with those on, it's a status symbol. He's showing off how wealthy and sophisticated he is. Yeah. And you won't find many paintings of people with them, but they do exist, and he's one of them. Yeah, I've seen several portraits of him, and almost all of them have him with his sunglasses on. Same pair, by the way. So that means he's better about taking care of them than I am. He says, in short, not only are things not what they seem, they're not even what they're called. And this is something that's kind of, intuitively I think we understand this. It becomes difficult to explain it, though. And you can think about some of the things that are not what we call them. For example, really simply put, love. We use the word love all the time. I've talked about, like you love buffaloing and you love your parents. Hopefully you have different feelings towards your parents than you have towards buffalo wings. So what is the thing so how do we actually feel about buffalo wings? We use the word love because it's just simpler, than explaining it. If you just say, like, I really enjoy buffalo wings, it doesn't have the same kind of bite and flair. The problem with that, though, is that we now lose, we don't get a heightened sense of what love is. We get now a diluted and diminished sense of what love is. In other words, if you say, oh, I love buffalo wings, and I love the weather, and I love these blinds in the room, and you've now kind of degraded what it is to feel love. And then when you say something like, oh, I love my girlfriend, I love my boyfriend, it's a different thing, though, of course. But now that thing about saying love doesn't quite have the same meaning and bite as it used to. And we've talked about this before, months ago anyway. If you remember, I talked about the Greek forms of love and how the Greeks have this kind of progressive understanding of what love is, where it's like you begin with eros, which is kind of like an attraction, then you end with agape, which is non-emotional, duty-based action. It's a verb more than it is a sentiment. And you have these kind of gradations in between. It tells us something really important about the power of language, and how language doesn't just, I guess you could say language shapes our thoughts, because you can only think in a language that you've mastered. You can only think with the words that you have available to you. If you find yourself sometimes, I'm sure, and everybody finds themselves at this point sometime in their life, it becomes very difficult to explain what you're thinking about something or feeling. Like, I just can't explain it. Then we get really frustrated because we have a feeling or we have a thought and it kind of makes sense in here. Actually, it makes sense right in there. I'll talk more about that next semester. But it makes sense inside there. It just doesn't make sense here as we try to process it there to come out here. It's a weird thing. How does it you can feel something or experience a sensation and not be able to describe it? But it happens to us frequently. And so what happens is that we grab onto extreme words as a way of trying to explain that. So for example, like I've said, we love food. If you don't like a person, if you disagree with them about something, especially something political, they're Nazis, right? Yeah, they're literally Hitler. We shouldn't have school uniforms. You think we should? Yeah, that's what Hitler thought too. We go to this extreme a lot of times when we try to think about some kind of evil in the world, but trying to work our way back in gradations. Because if we only think of evil in terms of the most evil example we can think of, well, how many people are actually Nazis? That's a pretty small group. It's a pretty small number of people. It's like, I don't know if you guys, was it like 5 years ago now, 4 years ago? There was a rally in Charlottesville, North Carolina. And it was a group called, the overall thing was called Unite the Right. And then you had people from like all over the spectrum of the right side of the political spectrum. And I read for a couple of days about how Nazis showed up and were marching. And there were these pictures of people like carrying tiki torches and stuff like this, if you guys remember this. And I remember that, and I'm not, I look at a lot of news, man. I read a lot of news. I have to spend at least an hour and a half a day just reading news stuff to see what's going on in the world. And I remember those couple of days, I saw these pictures and these reports about Nazis marching in North Carolina. I didn't even read them. I shrugged my shoulders and said, huh, because I'm so used to people just being called Nazis. if we don't like them, what do we call them? We just call them Nazis. You know, right-wing extremists. You know, we call them fascists. And so those words now have completely lost their meaning in normal context. It's like people will oftentimes compare X to the Holocaust. You know, like I remember living in Los Angeles, there, PETA, you know, the organization People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or people who eat tasty animals, whichever way you understand it. They had these billboards out, and they were comparing the slaughter of chickens to the Holocaust. They had like pictures of chickens who were were going to be slaughtered, and then on the other side of the panel, they had people in concentration camps in the striped pajamas. You can imagine some people were offended by that. Now, from PETA's perspective, they really, I mean, the comparison's just not there, because obviously chickens are being killed for a very different reason from what was happening with Nazis, whatever. Even if you accept their premise, which their premise is that chickens and humans equally valuable, that one is not more valuable than the other. This is what they believe. Yeah. Even if you accept that premise, to compare that to the Holocaust is an inexact comparison. It's an imprecise comparison. Essentially, all you're saying is, well, all we're saying is that people were slaughtered en masse. Yeah, but the reason matters. You know, why it happened matters, and the means and what it meant historically matters. I don't like Holocaust comparisons generally, because only the Holocaust was the Holocaust. And so when it's an important thing, and it happened for a specific reason. It's worth remembering what those things are. But oftentimes, if we can't think of a way of expressing how we feel about things, we'll just say, that's like a genocide, you know? Do you remember what it was several years ago, like, a better example, it's like 2 years ago now. It was the year that before we went on lockdown, so 2020. I was doing a Saturday school, and there was a dude in the class, and he, Filipino dude, and he was just kind of like I don't know, talk too much, which for me, that's pretty extreme. It was more like he was a smart ass who thought he was very smart, but he wasn't particularly. And so one of his friends showed up late, and I said, yeah, you can't be here. You're like 20 minutes later, whatever it was. And so I wouldn't let his friend stay. So he got all pissy about that. And I said, if you don't like it, you can go with your friend. So he stayed by there. And then a few minutes after that, one of my students showed up later than that. And she walked in, hey, Scott, hey, what's up? So she went and sat down. And he's like, why did she get to stay? And I jokingly said, she's my student, and I like her. What actually was that she had gone to a different classroom, and there was no room over there. And so the teacher was walking asking, he was sending out emails to other teachers who were here asking, does anybody have any room to take the student? So she was just hanging out there for like 15 minutes waiting for him to book. And then I finally responded and said, yeah, I have room. So she sent her over here. That's why she was late. But he didn't realize this. So I just gave him a smart-ass answer because he was a smart-ass. So when she came in and I let her stay, he was like, well, how come she gets to stay? He goes, you're racist. And I said, yeah, but in this case, why? And he says, well, because you let her stay because, I don't know, she's a girl and he wasn't?
That's not
right. And so you all have the same quizzical look. I looked at everybody else like, does anybody else? No, I said, yeah, I suppose so. The race of women, I suppose, And he said, well, also, like, he was, I don't know what to do. I guess, I think he was Filipino. He said, plus, she's Mexican, he's Filipino. I said, yeah. He goes, so you're racist. I didn't know what to say, so I said, yes. Yes.
You said yes.
Yeah. And if people were laughing at him, I said, hey, don't laugh at him. It's not smart. Be nice to it. Because this is a dude who goes through life this way, and he has to inhabit this mind, and this is how he sees the world. And we're not going to change his mind by laughing at him necessarily. It's a good thing to laugh at people in power, because it takes away power. But people who are just not smart, laughing at him doesn't really do much except for make people angry. And it doesn't. It's not going to convince anybody. It's not going to turn anybody to your side. And me saying that to him wasn't going to suddenly make him understand that he was completely misusing the word. But why was he using that word? Because he didn't have another word to describe what he was feeling. All he knew is racism bad. If you don't like somebody, therefore they're racist. Or if a person distinguishes between two people for some reason, it doesn't matter what the reason is. If I don't like it, you just call them racist. So he was completely wrong on various grounds, but I wasn't going to convince him. So I just said, all right, dude, one more word, you're out of here, man. You know? And he said, sorry. So what did I do? I kicked him out. I said, there was your one word, dude, you're out of here. And he was like, really? I go, that's one more word, man, you're gone. Yeah. But again, it's just because he didn't have the words to describe what he was really thinking, what he was really feeling, you know? And you'll find that this is what we do. When we're not able to do that, we speak in hyperbole. We go to extremes. But now the problem is that the extremes now lose their meaning. So what happens if that guy calls me a racist because I let a girl stay but not a guy? What happens if he ever comes across a real racist? Imagine if he came running over to me and says, yeah, they're racists over there, you know, marching, whatever. I would say, oh, okay, so you don't like the fact that they get to stay? I understand. I'd walk in the opposite direction. It wouldn't mean anything to me because he's not using a word he's used a word that doesn't mean anything. He's taken the complete meaning out of it, which is problematic because those are exactly the kinds of words that have to have meaning, if this makes sense. You know, you'll find this that it's exactly the kinds of words that have to have meaning that we pull the meaning out when we speak with hyperbole. Things like love, hate, racist, sexist. These are things that should mean something to us, but when we just throw them around willy-nilly, now they don't mean anything anymore. So now what happens if you actually come across a real swastika-wearing goose-stepping Nazi? What do you call them? I mean, you've already called everybody else a Nazi. What do you call this guy now? You know? And again, it's only because of a poverty of thought. We don't know what to do, so I guess we could say it's an immaturity of thought. It's a poverty of maturity. Meaning that when you're talking to like little kids either love you or they hate you. There's really not much in between because their brains aren't quite developed to the point yet where they can think in gradations like that. It isn't until you mature that you kind of realize, oh wait, there are those kind of various things in there. This is why some of you guys probably have memories of some of your teachers when you're growing up and you're thinking that the teacher either loved you or they hated you. And some people never quite grow past that. I still come across people at y'all's ages who are still talking like that. Oh, I hate them, this person hates me or they love me. There's not much in between. Being able to recognize those gradations is a sign of maturity. And by maturity, I don't just mean like you kind of force yourself to develop in these ways, but it's also that your mind has come to the point that it's sharp enough to make these distinctions in those gradations. And so you can kind of force yourself to make those distinctions, but it takes time, it takes effort. And for the most part, we don't want to put the effort into it, because it's just easier to say hate or love or whatever. You know? It's one of the problems of I can leave it at that. So things are not what they seem. In fact, they're not even what they're called. We call things by things that they're just not. We use different words for things. I mean, I think it was Oscar Wilde who said, we should call things by their proper names. It makes matters simpler. When someone dies, what's happened to them? They've gone to a better place. Have they? I don't know, man. Some people may be ending up in hell. I don't know if that's a better place. Some people may survive and have to live in a hell, which is even worse. So we may say that somebody is, someone's died, they've kicked the bucket, they've moved on, they've transcended, they've died. Call things by their proper names. It makes matters simpler. You enjoy buffalo because you don't love them.
They're delicious.
They're delicious. Yeah. Call things by their proper names. How are you guys doing today?
Well,
Great.
Pretty good.
Depends.
Great. Are you really?
Yes. No.
Many of you are not. And you'll find this now, understand why it is that we do this. Again, it's to simplify. It's so that we can go through life. As soon as I bring it over, I lean on it all day. And again, we do it to simplify. And so it isn't necessarily a terrible thing. Like when you walk in and I ask you guys, how's it going? I don't necessarily go by your words. I go by how you say it. And how are you guys today? Fine. Oh, good. Not so fine. How are you? Great. Not so great, huh? Not so great. You know, how are you today? Terrible. You won't believe how bad of a day I've had. Huh. Well, I guess there's probably a good story behind it anyway. You know, something entertaining, something that made it worthwhile. So we can tell by tones. And there are some of I know people who are taken by their words. Oh, how about this? You screw up. What do you say? Sorry. Are you?
No.
No? I have a good friend of mine does not take sorry. She hates sorries. You say sorry to her, she gets furious. Why? She has a whole lifetime of people saying sorry to her who weren't really sorry. You know? Another friend of mine, I'll tell you the story, leave with this. This is many years ago, a friend of mine was telling me that she was ironing her shirt in the morning, and while she was ironing, her husband came up behind her and snuck up and tickled her. Apparently she's very ticklish. So what did she do? Burned her. Yeah, she jumped and she burned herself. And so she's like, oh my God, what the hell's wrong with you? And he says, sorry! Was he sorry?
No.
Imagine if instead of saying sorry, he had run into the kitchen, grabbed some ice, came running back, put the ice on it, which he shouldn't do, by the way, but let's say he didn't know this. And then he's holding out there, and she's pissed at him still, like, get away from me. No, listen, I'm sorry that this happened. You're pissed at me right now, but this has to happen right now. I'm sorry, I hurt you, and I love you very much, and I want to make sure you're okay. That's that's an expression of sorry. That's not just saying it, that's actually acting it out. Yeah. Then I have another friend of mine who I'm thinking of right now who doesn't take sorry unless you kind of like go to the extreme and start like kissing ass and like, you know, start to like, you know, flog yourself because you're so sorry. Yeah, and she won't take sorry unless you completely change away from what you're doing. It's probably somewhere, you know, in there where it should be reflected in your behavior. Just like the things that you say should be reflected in your behavior. What's important to you? If I ask these questions, like, what are the kinds of things that are important to you? Are they really the things that we're explaining, or are they just kind of the things that we're saying? You know, words have meaning. They should. You know, this is why I have one of my standing rules of life. I don't trust people who change the meaning of words. If someone comes along and tries to change the meaning of something, my question is, why don't you just make a new word? Why do you have to change the meaning of a word that already exists? It's because they're trying to change the way that you think. And it's deceitful, it's manipulative, it's dark. Because if these things don't have meaning to us, then they can't convey thoughts that we actually do have, if this makes sense. So like, for example, like I said, if you really do love something, how do you say it? If you no longer have access to the word love, or if the word love doesn't mean anything anymore. How can you say sorry about something if the word sorry no longer actually does convey that sentiment? You know, we dilute it. It's one of the reasons that we admire people who are people of only a few words. I am not that guy. I'm a person of many, many, many words to try to get a few across. You know, throw a bunch on the wall and see which ones stick. And so, it's not just what they call it, you know. So, questions, comments, concerns, complaints?
Just like you said, you could give me